right, good evening, everybody. My name is Todd Scholl. I'm the lead learner at the Center for Educator Wellness and Learning, a new center created by the South Carolina Education Association. And I'm really thrilled and honored to be here tonight to have an important conversation about recruiting males and minorities into the teaching profession. My guests tonight are folks that I've met before, I've worked with before, just a really great group of people to talk about this. We've got Dr. Anthony James, who's from the College of Charleston and is the advisor for the Call Me Mr. program there. Dr. Marcella Wine-Snyder, who is the director of pre-collegiate programs at the Center for Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Advancement. We also have three of the misters with us from the Call Me Mr. program: Pierre Edwards, Kyle Fersner, and Jaheim President. And I don't know if you guys remember this, Kyle and Jaheim, but when I came down to when you were at Ashley Ridge High School, you may want to give your teacher cadet instructor a shout out here, but we came down there and we talked about these issues. I don't know, it's probably about 3 or 4 years ago. We had that first conversation. We did a video and talked about those things. So I'd appreciate your being a part of this discussion tonight. It'll be interesting to see, how your insights on these topics have evolved through your work at College of Charleston. But I'd like to start off with all of you, and this question is, why is it important that we have that we work hard to recruit both males and minorities into the teaching profession?
For me, this is really why I got into education to begin with. It's a simple concept, but representation matters. A lot of students don't see people that look like us in the classroom, obviously, and that I feel is driving me and a lot of my peers to become educators. Representation is honestly one of the biggest factors there. Students aren't going to go where they don't feel they belong. So we have to see people that look like us in these positions so that we can realize that these positions are accessible to us. You know what I'm saying? So.
I'll jump right in. I could definitely agree with Kyle because that's what I was about to say. Representation matters. Minority students make up more than about 40% of the U.S. public school population, while only about 17% of U.S. teachers are minorities. So teachers of color, we serve as role models for students, giving them a clear and a concrete sense of what diversity actually is and what it looks like. And so therefore, we must find ways to counteract disparities that we see happening in public education.
Absolutely.
I'll piggyback off of that. I mean, just like Kyle said, for me, it's about having somebody in the classroom feeling like comfortable that I could relate to. I mean, in my personal experience, and most of us in the program, we didn't see many of us, firstly, males in the classroom, secondly, minority males. That was very important for me, and advocating for those kids that are labeled as bad students. It's not that they're bad students. I've always been passionate about those kids that just actually needed somebody they could relate to. Diversity is very rare and scarce in the field of education for us. And so that's what really led me to this program and advocating for those.
I would say the same thing. I say, for me, it kind of, I guess I do. Some of my teachers that were white, they couldn't understand me in certain ways, in certain things I would say, and certain things I would do. I remember one time I had a teacher who, said I was talkative and stuff like that, but I was actually bored. And so in class, I would get in trouble for just different stuff like that. And, and not kind of feeling like I belonged in certain things they would say, and certain, social cues I would give off. And so having a Black teacher, just kind of, because when I did have them, they could kind of understand like, oh, okay, got Jaheim, and they can kind of talk to me in a certain way that will kind of regroup me. If compared to if a teacher that was Caucasian would talk to me, it would be like, whoa. So just that was my personal experience.
Thank you. Dr. James?
And I would say changing the narrative, right? For many of our minority boys, they need to see a different kind of role model. kids who grow up in certain neighborhoods, the men in their lives that they see are often different from others. I remember my first day teaching, I met this little boy in kindergarten, and when I asked him what his name was, he told me that he asked my name. And his first question to me was, when did you get out of jail? And I think it was a very impactful moment in my professional career, and it really made me think about the impact that we could have, not only for, Black children, but also change the narrative for white children as well, right?
Right.
Despite what they may have been taught or told or seen on TV, we have the power to change the narrative that they have about us.
Absolutely. That's a point that we often overlook, that representation is not only important for the people, for young students of color, but also for my kids, to have a diverse group of teachers leading them as well. And so I think that's a great point. I wanted to give a shout out to Victoria Merritt, who was Jaheim and Kyle's, or I should say Mr. Fersner, Mr. President's teacher cadet instructor at Ashley Ridge High School. And I wanted to talk about that. I know Dr. Wine-Snyder has been instrumental in developing that teacher cadet program here in South Carolina. For those who aren't familiar, go to teachercadets.com. Phenomenal program. Both of us, Dr. Wine-Snyder and I, were both teacher cadets, and I know Kyle and Jaheim were. Taking a look at that, though, what was it about that Miss Merritt did, and what is it that educators at the high school level can do to reach out to males and minorities to say, hey, this is a profession that's for you, or teacher cadets, this is a program you might want to look into? What was it that she did that caught your eye?
Jaheim, me trying to figure out who's going. Miss Merritt, she was a godsend. She just gave us so much perspective. One of the biggest things that she ever told me, she told the whole class really, on the first day at our teacher cadet class, our senior year of high school, she told us, this class is, to teach you more about what it is like to become an educator and everything, but I'm not trying to convince you to become one in this class. I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to try and convince you of anything, really. She told us that this is about becoming an advocate for the profession, because that's really what it needs, is, more civilian level advocates that, understand that perspective, understand what it's like to be an educator, even when they're not sometimes. But for me personally, she helped us, she gave us all the statistics and everything. She gave us the mission statements that, evolved into what we have now. She gave us the basis for, why I wanted to be an educator, that morphed into, or just kind of embodied itself in the Call Me Mr. program. And I'm so happy I found that as well. But another huge thing she did was just gave us that exposure, so we just got the opportunity to visit a lot of different classrooms. I got to see different forms of education. I never really wanted to be an educator until I took that class, admittedly, because of my exposure to students and seeing how they interacted with me in that classroom, knowing that I'm not their traditional educator. And like I said, different forms of education. Once I saw Montessori schools and Waldorf schools and, just different formats of education, I realized that this didn't have to be as black and white as I always thought it was growing up in K through 12, because I went to public school.
For me, it was kind of, I always knew I was going to be a teacher. And so she kind of, like Kyle said, exposed us, but it wasn't negative. I feel like when we talk to so much teachers now, it's always, we don't have the money, or this, that, but she gave us solutions. She told us, or kind of in so much words, that we were the solutions. And this class was to help us become solutions and not problems. I feel like that's kind of why many males and many individuals don't want to go into teaching, is because it's such a negative perspective. And the teachers who are actually teaching are continuing the negative trend. But she was one of the teachers that, positive. And because of her, we are at the college, because if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have met Dr. James. We wouldn't be here today talking. So she was all about finding solutions, made us go to the school board to talk. I never in my life would I would have had the courage enough to do that. And then we, life took us different ways, but she was just all about solutions instead of bringing up the problems. So that's why she was so influential.
Dr. Wine-Snyder, for those who might be tuning in who aren't as familiar with the Teacher Cadet program, you want to just give people a quick overview of that program and how young people can get connected to that program in their high school here in South Carolina.
Absolutely. Well, our Teacher Cadet program is our high school recruitment program aimed at attracting the state's best and brightest students to the teaching profession. And you could see, like we have on this podcast, we have the state's best and brightest that are becoming teachers that are on their journey. But throughout the program, what they are involved in is getting to know who they are as learners, and then actually applying those skills in the classroom when they go in and do their field experience. They're working one-on-one with students, they're tutoring students, all through the aspect of taking over a classroom and being the teacher in that classroom. And we know that we're not going to convince every single teacher cadet in the state to become a classroom teacher. But like a few of the gentlemen said, a few of the misters said, we know that we are going to get advocates for education as a result of their experience in the program. And that's something that's generational.
Absolutely. Mr.
So
Edwards, oh, sorry, go ahead.
If they're interested in the Teacher Cadet program, we're in about 237 high schools across the state. So please go see your guidance counselor if you know you're a Teacher Cadet instructor in your school building directly. For those of you listening, please apply to the program.
Yeah, such a wonderful program. I know you benefited from that. I went to it here at Conway High School. Shout out to Ruthie Warren, who's my Teacher Cadet instructor, and Bonner Guidera, who was my Spanish instructor who helped create the program. So, and it's been such a wonderful success story for the state of South Carolina and has expanded across the country. Mr. Edwards, I didn't want to leave you out. Is there somebody who was it that encouraged you to become a teacher? Is there a story behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few. I don't want to talk everybody's head off, but Dana Long was my third grade teacher over at Stiles Point Elementary. So I grew up here in Charleston. I went to Stiles Point, James Allen Middle, and then James Allen High. Dana Long, by far one of the biggest inspirations. Dr. Karen Smale here at the College of Charleston actually convinced me to switch my major into phys ed, being an elementary ed major. But there's been a few people, but again, representation. Can't forget Dr. Breland when I came to the college in 2014, enjoying Call Me Mr. Just hearing his story, and then I come to find out he knows my grandfather. But State Representative Floyd Breland, rest in peace. That's my guy right there.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. James. Let's shift gears and talk about we've talked a little bit about the Teacher Cadet program. Let's talk a little bit about Call Me Mr. Now, we did that on a podcast. If you haven't checked out the podcast episode, we had Dr. James and some of the misters talking about that in greater depth. But we'd be remiss not to at least talk about the Call Me Mr. program and like what that is and how young folks can get connected with that program.
Yeah, so Call Me Mr. is a program designed to recruit and support minority men in their education programs. We offer robust scholarships. We offer cultural support, especially for those at PWIs, academic support, and we just provide a network of men who are like-minded, who have the same mission, the same goals as everyone else. And a great way to get connected is to visit the site at Clemson. If you Google Call Me Mr. at Clemson University, I believe there's a tab where you can select the college you want to go to, or you can email me and I'll drop my email in the chat later. I don't care what school you want to go to, because we always say there are many schools with only one mister. So my only goal is to get you in someone's classroom. So if you feel comfortable reaching out to me, I'll definitely put you in contact with the correct person.
Yeah. So when a young man goes through Call Me Mr., do they receive some funds to help them with pay for college, and what are some of the opportunities that they get through that program to help them as they go into the career?
Yes, so the young man can earn up to $10,000 per year.
Wow.
In scholarships, and that is renewable. And so, and that's based on their ability to get a certain score on the SAT and the ACT. And if they can't, then we can provide options with the Praxis score. But we do everything in our power to prepare these young men for that moment. And right now we're currently interviewing, many of the programs are now interviewing or accepting new members, and we're preparing those young men for that.
Yeah, both of those programs, Teacher Cadets and Call Me Mister, have such a great reputation, and we just need more young folks to know about both of those programs. I wanted to, I don't want to, Mr. President made a good point of not getting too negative, but I do want to ask the misters, as you look around and you hear from other male minority young people, why aren't they going into education? What are some of the obstacles in getting us to recruit more young men like you?
It's funny. I recently had a conversation with a close friend of mine, and I guess he had never really realized that I was an education major, and he was very surprised to hear that. The first thing he asked me was, "Oh, so like you want to do that?" Which I found absolutely hilarious. But full transparency, I feel like they simply have not had that exposure that we have had. Like, I did not always want to be an educator, and I've always been a minority. So I know what it's like to be on the other side of the fence and, look at education with disdain and say, why would I want to get myself into something that I've always wanted to leave? It feels like going K through 12. That's the whole point, is to graduate, get out, leave. And now I'm getting myself back into it. But it's really just like nobody's came to them and told them the basic facts of what it is. Everybody doesn't know the opportunities that exist in the education field. And not everybody is willing to commit to the impact that it's going to make. It's a sacrifice, and, there's pros and cons that come with the education field, of course, but at the end of the day, I know that it's a righteous profession. I know that I'm going to get something much deeper than any monetary or physical gain out of this at the end of my life. So I'm not worried about that kind of thing. And everybody isn't willing to make that commitment, which is completely fine. Everybody doesn't need to be an educator, and that's totally okay. But, if you're given the exposure to know that it is in fact an option and you still choose not to, that's cool. Do what you want to do. Never going to tell you otherwise, but just have the exposure, know that it is an option. Most minority men, I would argue, don't even really see it as an option. Again, because of that lack of representation. If you don't see people in that position, you're not going to assume that you can get to that position. So I guess exposure, they haven't had that conversation yet.
I think for me, what deters people from it, standardized testing. That's super important in my opinion, just because we are now in a society where we are shifting the narrative, the culture's changing. You can't really assess a student if he's a good student, high performing student. We are, technology and science has come such a far way. There's test anxiety, there's performance anxiety. Not everybody's a great test taker. So when you do talk to people about getting in the field of education, well, they almost look at it like you're going to law school. Well, you got to take X amount of practices. You got to take principles of learning technique and the pedagogical stuff that's 30, 40, 50 years ago. And that can deter them. And secondly, I'd say the stigma around education. In my experience down here, I've always heard teachers, oh, we don't make enough. If you're not morally fulfilled and satisfied, then you're in the wrong field to begin with. It's not about the compensation. And secondly, I think that teachers definitely make enough to where you can live comfortably. If you're living above your means, of course you're going to feel like you don't make enough. But again, it's one of those career paths where it's morally fulfilling. And if we are in a generation now where we're complaining about the younger kids and all these things, and oh, they got no morals, no standards. How do you change that? You get into education, you become that example, you become that leader, you become that role model. You teach them what it's like to be a young male, a young woman with standards and values. And then that's how we shift society and the culture, one student at a time.
I would say for me, and this is still one of my concerns. They are scared of being in the wrong environment that will box them in, because like we are saying, like I when I ask my professors now, I'm like, especially that who knows principals around here, is like, would I fit in with that culture? And when I go to schools, like, would I fit in with that culture? Would I have being a young teacher, then a Black male? Will I be able to grow and do everything that I see that my classroom needs, or will I have to conform to the Southern charm or the Southern narrative? And that's kind of scary. So they'll go to like fields where they can feel like they can express themselves and not have somebody be hassled, because they've been hassled all through K-12 and be hassled by the same thing. And also, we don't have a lot of, not just teachers, Black male teachers, we don't have a lot of Black minority principals and stuff like that who you can kind of go to, kind of like if you were in the classroom as a student and go to say, well, I'm going through this, I'm going through that. Not saying that the Caucasian people don't feel the same way, but it's just that same connection where you can feel that family environment and not feel boxed in by your career and have to do this for 30 years or stuff like that. So that's why I see.
Dr. Wine-Snyder, I know that you've been over the pre-collegiate programs for how long has it been now? Yeah.
It's been nearly 15 years.
Yeah. So what have you been seeing in terms of what are some of the roadblocks you see in terms of being able to successfully bring young men and minorities into, say, the teacher cadet program or the teaching field in general?
Right. I think the title actually of this podcast is apropos, elevating educator voices, because that's basically what we need to do. I mean, morale is down. Everyone is completely frustrated. Our teachers across South Carolina and the US, they are working extremely hard. And every day they just want to be heard, and they want to be valued as the professionals that they are. And that's what sometimes is frustrating. What I see across the state, and actually across the US, is there is a decline in students majoring in education. If you look at the data from ACT or SAT test takers, those students, when they're bubbling in their career choice, not many of them are choosing teaching. Even our teacher preparation institutions across the state, they're seeing a decline in enrollment as well. So I think that's what we need to do. We need to elevate the teaching profession. We need to treat our teachers as the professionals they are. And we just need to make sure that they are supported.
All right, thank you, Dr. James. I know it's critical for the College of Education there to have enough education students. And have you been seeing a decline? And if so, what would you attribute that to?
Yeah, there's been a definite decline. And here's the thing, and I'm gonna look at it from a different lens. Like, so once we do get the students there, right? And I think Pierre touched on this, like the testing part, right? I can't tell you how many young men do not become educators because of Praxis Core, PLT, and their content areas. And I think and here's the crazy thing, I don't think those tests can determine how good of a teacher you can be. Because if that's the case, we wouldn't have, alternative certification programs, right? And so I just think that we really need to, as a state, really look at the number of tests and the importance behind them. Because, I think that's a really big issue in schools across the state and the country. I know a lot of Call Me Up Mr. programs also struggle with that same concept, just getting these young men through the various practices that they need to take.
Yeah. I'm shifting gears a little bit. On this question is for the misters. As you've been preparing, whether it was through teacher cadets or in your internships or practicums that you've been a part of in college, can you name a moment that was really special to you where you realized that your position, that your being there in that school made a difference for a young person? And whether it's a story about representation or a story about the impact that you've had, the positive impact. Because I know Mr. Edwards was talking about, that, and I think Mr. Fersner also referred to this, that the teaching profession really, I mean, we're not getting in it to get rich. The primary motivation is to have that impact. So maybe you could share an anecdote or two about the impacts that you've had so far.
Most definitely. Wow, where do I start? I guess my earliest noticeable experience, like I said, when I was in teacher cadet, I was given the opportunity to, observe in many different schools. And at one point I was at Beach Hill Elementary over in Somerville. And I was just sitting in the back of the classroom observing. And this is before I had truly made the commitment to becoming an educator, but it helped solidify that. So it had an equal amount of impact on me, I would say, as it did that student that day. But he came up to me after, towards the end of class, they were doing group work, and he just, found a way to get out of it and made his way to the back of the classroom to have a little discussion with me. And he asked me why I was there. And before I had the chance to answer, he looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "You know what? You look like a rapper." And I don't think I look anything like a rapper, but at that point in time, I had, the box braids and everything. I was wearing, I don't dress traditionally when I go into classrooms, because again, like Dr. James said earlier, I'm here to change that image. So I'm doing it in every way that I can. So I would agree that I didn't necessarily look like a teacher. I don't know if I'd go as far to say as I look like a rapper, but I decided to make it a teachable moment. So I looked at the student and told him, "No, man, I'm actually here to, I want to be a teacher. I'm going to become an educator." And, you could see his mind start to move. It started to shift perspectives. And that was probably the first moment that I've realized that could make an impact. And, since then I've been in countless schools. Most recently, my field experience, as I'm going through right now, I had a student that I had to say goodbye to on my last day, and watching him just smile so hard, knowing that he had that couple of months with me, knowing that I could come in, and every Wednesday when I was in that classroom, he had somebody that he could come to if he needed help with the test. He had an IEP, and I was always that person that was there with him, trying to be as understanding as possible. And he also happened to be the only minority male in that class. So I don't think it was any coincidence that he, felt that connection the same way that I did. And at the end of the day, when I saw that kid smile, that changes everything. Like we said earlier, it's never about the money. When you see a kid smile at you the way he did, and you go for a high five and he just holds your hand and refuses to let go, come on. Like, there's no replacing that feeling ever. So, that's why I'm here.
I'll go. So for me, it's kind of two moments. Once again, teacher cadet in high school. So I want to be a middle school teacher. So I was in the School of the Arts at Rollins Middle School of the Arts. And you could kind of tell I had some minorities in my classroom, but more important, I had a greater impact on my Caucasian students, because they haven't seen a male teacher that wasn't in PE, we love our sports, but that wasn't in PE, that was actually not saying not a teacher, but just not in PE, not a coach, because everybody get that, as males, we get that stigma that we have to be football coaches, basketball coach, soccer coach, whatever, or we have to be the behavior where you just sit all day. So having that experience, it was kind of cool. And then this past semester, I was at Northwoods Middle, and it's a predominantly Black school, and just having a presence in my classroom, like just laughing with the students, showing them that that teachers actually have a real personality. And one student, my first day there, I love giving people high fives, so COVID, whatever. So I just started giving him high five, and every Wednesday he would look for me for a high five, and just that positive impact. And I smile all the time, and just warming people up and people coming towards me. So those are the two impact moments that I was like, okay, well, this is the right job and this is the right time.
Mr. Edwards.
What you trying to say about PE, man? Fun fact, I was an elementary ed major before I switched to PE, just putting that out there. But anyway, so my story is a little different. I actually am employed and have been employed for the past 2 years in a local district. And so I actually taught computers and tech at an elementary school. a very diverse school, and two little moments that kind of solidify why I need to be there. One, very diverse school, predominantly white, a little bit of minorities, Black, Hispanic. And I had a kid in my class come to my computer lab and was like, "Are you so-and-so's dad?" referring to another kid that was Black. And instead of being offended, I took that as an opportunity to kind of, again, make that a learning experience for that student. Why that's like, because they like, well, you guys are the same skin color. And this is probably like a second grader, I believe. And I took that as a learning opportunity to let that student know, that's kind of not really appropriate, but here's why, et cetera, et cetera. And without being offended. And that was a great experience. And secondly, again, like I said, I taught computers. So students would come into my class, and I'm a very, I guess, intimidating specimen. So I've been told I'm 6'3", 280. So, any elementary school student looking up as like freaked out, but gentle giant when it comes to the little ones. So my lab was very, very interesting. I had superhero posters everywhere, men and women. I had video games, characters. I had, banners of different sports teams. And so any child, whether it was pre-K, 5th grade, that came into my lab kind of was like, "Hey, what's going on with this guy? What's up with Mr. Edwards?" And that was just really, that solidified for me that I knew no matter the content area, I belonged in schools. And again, taking those kids and just impacting them every day.
Beautiful. Thank you for those stories. I want to leave, we're running out of time. I want to leave the final question for Dr. Wine-Snyder and Dr. James. What can the state do that they're not currently doing to improve the odds that we can get more Mr. Edwardses and Presidents and Fersners into our classrooms?
I'll start with that. Outreach is one. The guys, the Misters and Dr. James, we've all talked about representation matters. And if representation matters as much as we say it does, then we need to reach out to those that we want to recruit into the profession. And we need to provide the means for them, access, tools, and resources for them to do so.
Dr. James?
That's definitely a starting point.
100%.
Yeah, I agree 100% because we have to remember that these young men are our greatest ambassadors, right? When we go to middle schools and high schools and they see these young men, a great story that Todd and I shared a couple weeks ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, I took Kyle and Jaheim. We all went to Somerville High School, and one of the young men that we spoke to, I think he was a sophomore at the time, is now graduating, and he's applying to my program this year. So I know that having these young men in these programs and sending them out into different schools, it works. It really works. And so, for my last thing, I want to leave you all with a Chinese proverb that kind of speaks to that. It says, if your vision is for a year, plant wheat. If your vision is for 10 years, plant trees. However, if your vision is for a lifetime, plant people. And I think that's what Call Me Mr. has done well over the last 22 years. We planted people, put them in certain positions so they can impact the children of tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much. We talked a lot about what's wrong in public education in South Carolina, but we've got examples tonight of what's right. And Mr. Edwards, Mr. President, Mr. Fersner, you are what's right in public education in South Carolina. And I think your stories and your attitudes about things and your thoughts and your insights and your wisdom, I think it can provide people a lot of hope about the future of education here in South Carolina. But we've got a lot of work to do because we need more of you in our profession for so many different reasons. But thank you for choosing education, and thank you for the impact that you're going to have on countless numbers of young people's lives. And I appreciate your time tonight and your thoughts. And Dr. Wine-Snyder, always good to see you. And Dr. James, thank you so much for your time tonight. And if you are watching, I just want to encourage everybody tonight. If you want to know more about the SCEA, go to the SCEA.org. We'd love to have you as a member. If you'd like to join the SCEA, go to jointhescea.org. Right now we is our early enrollment period, so you won't pay any dues until September. And college students, you can get a free membership. Just connect with us, and we'll make sure you get signed up. We'd like all of the young men involved in Call Me Mr. to be members of the SCEA, and we invite everybody watching to be a member of the SCEA. And again, that's jointhescea.org. So thanks so much again to all my panelists, and thanks to you for watching, and we'll see you on our next live stream. Take care.